They thought she was just a small cog in the machine. But when the machine collapsed, they realized who had built it from the beginning. A piece of code she once wrote in her bedroom would become the weapon that would destroy the empire of betrayers. And this time, her name would stand at the top of every commit line. My name is Madeline Porter, and I'm about to tell you how I rebuilt an empire from the ashes of betrayal. The security card reader beeped 3 times before flashing red. I swiped again, knowing it was futile. The magnetic strip on my Nexus Systems badge had been deactivated exactly 47 minutes ago, according to the timestamp on my phone when the IT department's automated email arrived. Your access privileges have been revoked effective immediately. I stood in the empty parking garage, holding the worthless piece of plastic between my fingers. 12 years of my life reduced to a defunct corporate ID with a photo where I still looked optimistic. The woman in that picture believed in meritocracy, in the noble pursuit of elegant code, in the idea that talent would eventually be recognized and rewarded. She was an idiot. The laptop bag slung over my shoulder contained my personal MacBook Pro, the one I'd brought from home when my corporate machine was remotely wiped during what they euphemistically called my transition meeting. Even now, I could taste the stale conference room air, smell the cheap coffee that had gone cold while Edgar Wells, our CTO, explained how my position was being restructured and how Derek Vaughn would be taking point on the customer behavior analytics vertical moving forward. Derek Vaughn. The name still left a bitter taste in my mouth. A 28-year-old developer who'd been hired 8 months ago, fresh out of a coding boot camp and armed with Edgar's recommendation. Edgar had met him at their weekly poker games, where Derek apparently impressed him with his fresh perspective and disruptive thinking. What Edgar failed to mention was that Derek's most disruptive achievement was convincing management that he'd architected the core prediction engine I'd spent 2 years building. The elevator in my apartment building hummed with the same mechanical indifference as the one at Nexus. I pressed the button for the 14th floor and watched the numbers climb, each one taking me further from the corporate hellscape I'd called home for over a decade. The reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman who looked older than her 38 years, with dark circles under her eyes and the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it that morning, when I'd walked out expecting another routine day of debugging Derek's incompetent implementations. The silence felt different now, heavier. This wasn't the comfortable quiet of evening unwinding. This was the hollow echo of professional exile. I dropped my bag by the door and moved to the spare bedroom I'd converted into my home office. The desk was cluttered with electronic detritus from years of side projects, Arduino boards, Raspberry Pi devices, external hard drives of various vintages, and cables that had bred in the darkness like digital bacteria. But my attention was fixed on one particular device, a dusty 2TB external drive that hadn't been powered on in 3 years. The drive contained something Edgar Wells and Derek Vaughn didn't know existed, the original source code for what would become Nexus Systems' flagship product. The code I'd written during my freelance days, before I'd made the mistake of joining their company and handing over my intellectual property in exchange for a steady paycheck and health insurance. I connected the drive to my MacBook and waited for it to spin up. The familiar mechanical whir brought back memories of late nights in this same chair, fueled by coffee and the pure satisfaction of solving complex problems. Back then, I'd called it the Nebula Engine, a machine learning framework designed to analyze and predict customer behavior patterns with unprecedented accuracy. The mathematics were elegant, the implementation was efficient, and the results were revolutionary. When I'd joined Nexus, I'd naively offered to enhance their existing analytics platform with techniques I'd developed independently. What I'd intended as a collaborative improvement became corporate appropriation. They'd wrapped my engine in their existing codebase, added their branding, and presented it to clients as their proprietary innovation. I'd been credited as a contributing engineer, while Derek had somehow maneuvered himself into the position of lead architect. The drive finished mounting, and I navigated to the root directory. There it was, a folder named Nebula Core, with a creation date of 3 years ago. 14 months before I'd signed my employment contract with Nexus. Inside were hundreds of files representing thousands of hours of work, all time-stamped and version-controlled with meticulous precision. I opened the main algorithm file and began reading through code I'd written in a different lifetime. The logic was sound, the implementation was elegant, and most importantly, it was mine. Every function, every variable name, every comment reflected my architectural decisions and coding style. The module that Nexus claimed as their crown jewel was built on foundations I'd laid in this very room. But something else caught my attention as I browsed through the repository. The code was better than I remembered, not just functional, but genuinely innovative. The prediction algorithms were more sophisticated than anything currently on the market, including the bastardized version that Nexus had been selling. I'd been so focused on the corporate politics and the day-to-day grind that I'd forgotten how powerful this system really was. The irony wasn't lost on me. Edgar had fired me for being too rigid and lacking adaptability, but he'd built his entire department around technology I'd created. Derek had impressed the board with his visionary approach to customer analytics, but he couldn't even understand the mathematics behind the algorithms he claimed to have designed. I leaned back in my chair and considered my options. I could fight this legally, but intellectual property battles were expensive and time-consuming. I could try to find another job, but my reputation had already been damaged by the carefully orchestrated narrative of my performance issues. Or I could do something more creative. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't expected. Nathan Cade, CTO of PulseForge Analytics. Nathan was everything Edgar wasn't: young, technically competent, and focused on innovation rather than office politics. We'd met at conferences over the years, and he'd made several attempts to recruit me away from Nexus. Madeline. Nathan's voice was warm but professional. I heard about what happened. I'm sorry. News travels fast in our industry, I replied, not surprised that he already knew about my termination. Fast enough. Look, I know this might not be the best time, but I'd like to discuss an opportunity. PulseForge is looking for a CTO, and you've always been my first choice for the position. I was quiet for a moment, processing the offer. CTO at PulseForge would be a significant step up from my previous role, but it would also mean working for a direct competitor of Nexus. The ethical implications were complex, but then again, ethics were apparently a luxury I could no longer afford. I'm interested, I said finally, but I'd want to discuss the technical direction of the platform. I have some ideas about customer behavior analytics that might be relevant. I was hoping you'd say that. How about we meet tomorrow? I'll show you our current architecture, and you can tell me what you think we're missing. After ending the call, I returned to the Nebula engine code. If I was going to make a move, I needed to understand exactly what I was working with. I spent the next several hours reviewing the algorithms, updating the documentation, and running performance benchmarks on my local machine. The results were even better than I'd hoped. The original Nebula engine outperformed Nexus's current implementation by nearly 60% in processing speed and 40% in prediction accuracy. Moreover, the modular architecture I designed was infinitely more scalable than the monolithic system Edgar's team had cobbled together. By dawn, I had a plan. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about demonstrating the difference between genuine innovation and corporate theater. Edgar and Derek had built their reputations on stolen intellectual property, but they'd never understood the underlying principles that made the technology work. When faced with real competition, their house of cards would collapse under its own weight. I spent the morning preparing for my meeting with Nathan. I cleaned up the Nebula engine code, removed any references to Nexus systems, and renamed the project Ether Core, a nod to the classical element that ancient philosophers believed filled the heavens. The symbolism seemed appropriate for a system that would rise above the terrestrial concerns of corporate backstabbing. The PulseForge offices were everything Nexus wasn't: modern, efficient, and designed for productivity rather than executive ego. Nathan met me in the lobby, and we headed directly to their engineering floor. The developers looked engaged. The whiteboards were covered with actual technical diagrams rather than marketing buzzwords. and the code quality visible on their monitors was impressive. This is our current customer analytics platform, Nathan explained as we stood in front of a wall-mounted display showing system architecture diagrams. It's functional, but we're hitting scalability limits. Our processing times are increasing exponentially with data volume, and our prediction accuracy is plateauing. I studied the diagrams, noting the architectural decisions that were causing their performance bottlenecks. The system was well designed but fundamentally limited by its reliance on traditional machine learning approaches. It was exactly the kind of problem that Ether Core was designed to solve. What if I told you I could improve your processing speed by 60% while reducing your server costs by 40%? I asked. Nathan raised an eyebrow. I'd say that sounds too good to be true, but I'd also want to see the proof. I pulled out my laptop and opened the Ether Core repository. This is a customer behavior prediction engine I've been developing independently. It uses a hybrid approach that combines deep learning with statistical modeling to achieve better accuracy with lower computational overhead. For the next hour, I walked Nathan through the technical architecture, explaining how Ether Core's algorithms could be integrated into PulseForge's existing platform. His questions were intelligent and probing, demonstrating a level of technical understanding that Edgar had never possessed. This is incredible, Nathan said finally. How long would it take to implement? If your team is as good as they look, we could have a working prototype in 6 weeks and a production deployment in 12. I replied, but I'd want to be involved in the implementation personally. This isn't the kind of technology you can hand off to junior developers. Nathan nodded. What would you need from us? CTO position, equity stake, and complete technical authority over the customer analytics division. I'm not interested in being a consultant or a contractor. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. The negotiation was refreshingly straightforward. Nathan understood the value of what I was offering, and he was prepared to make a competitive offer. By the end of the day, we had an agreement in principle. I would join PulseForge as Chief Technology Officer, with an equity package that would make me wealthy if the company succeeded. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the integration of Ether Core into PulseForge's platform. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying in a way that my years at Nexus had never been. I was building something new rather than maintaining someone else's legacy code, and every decision I made was based on technical merit rather than political considerations. The PulseForge engineering team was exceptional. They absorbed the Ether Core concepts quickly, asked intelligent questions, and implemented improvements that I hadn't even considered. Within a month, we had a working prototype that demonstrated the performance improvements I'd promised. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on the situation at Nexus through my network of former colleagues. The picture that emerged was one of increasing dysfunction. Without me to maintain the customer analytics platform, the system was beginning to show its age. Response times were increasing, prediction accuracy was declining, and customer complaints were mounting. Derek, thrust into a leadership role he wasn't qualified for, was struggling to maintain the facade of competence. His solutions to performance problems were crude and ineffective, adding more servers rather than optimizing algorithms, implementing quick fixes that created new bugs, and blaming system limitations on legacy code that needed to be refactored by someone with the original context. The irony was delicious. Derek was publicly complaining about code quality issues in the very system he'd claimed to have architected. Edgar, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly frustrated with his protégé's inability to deliver on the promises he'd made to the board. 3 months after my termination, PulseForge was ready to launch our enhanced customer analytics platform. The performance improvements were even better than I'd projected. Processing speeds had increased by 70%. Server costs had been reduced by 45%, and prediction accuracy had improved by 30%. More importantly, the system was designed to scale seamlessly as data volumes increased. Nathan suggested that we announce my appointment as CTO alongside the platform launch. The timing was strategic. It would demonstrate PulseForge's commitment to technical excellence while subtly highlighting the contrast with our competitors' approach to talent management. The press release was carefully crafted to emphasize the technical achievements without directly attacking Nexus. but the industry press was quick to connect the dots. Within hours of the announcement, technology blogs were running stories about the brilliant engineer who was pushed out of Nexus Systems only to emerge as CTO of their biggest competitor. The coverage was largely sympathetic to my situation, portraying me as a victim of corporate politics who had landed on her feet. Several articles mentioned the performance improvements in PulseForge's platform, with quotes from beta customers praising the system's speed and accuracy. But the real impact became apparent when existing Nexus customers began reaching out to PulseForge for demonstrations. The Ether Core-powered platform was simply superior to anything else on the market, and customers were quick to recognize the difference. Within 6 months, we had poached 3 of Nexus's largest accounts, with several others expressing interest in migrating their data. The migration process revealed the full extent of Nexus's technical debt. Customers who had been struggling with slow processing times and inaccurate predictions found that the same data processed through EtherCore produced results that were faster, more accurate, and more actionable. The contrast was stark enough that several customers publicly criticized Nexus for the poor quality of their previous service. Edgar was facing a crisis. The customer analytics platform that had been the cornerstone of Nexus's growth was hemorrhaging clients, and the technical team was unable to address the fundamental performance issues. The board was asking difficult questions about the platform's architecture and the decisions that had led to its current state. Derek, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. He was publicly blaming the problems on legacy code and technical debt accumulated over years of poor architectural decisions. In conference presentations and blog posts, he positioned himself as the victim of previous engineering choices, someone who was heroically trying to modernize a system that had been poorly designed from the beginning. The narrative was professionally crafted but technically nonsensical. Anyone with genuine expertise in customer analytics could see that the fundamental algorithms were sound. The problems were in the implementation layers that had been added later. Derek was essentially arguing that a Ferrari was slow because someone had replaced the engine with a lawnmower motor. The technology press was less kind to Derek than they had been to me. Several articles questioned his technical credentials and pointed out inconsistencies in his explanations of the platform's problems. One particularly damaging piece included quotes from former Nexus engineers who disputed his claims about the original architecture. The situation at Nexus continued to deteriorate. The company's stock price had fallen by 30% over 6 months, driven largely by concerns about their customer analytics platform. Several major clients had publicly announced their intention to migrate to competitors, citing performance and reliability issues. Edgar was scrambling to find solutions. He hired expensive consultants to audit the platform, but their reports confirmed what everyone already knew. The system was fundamentally sound, but had been poorly maintained and inappropriately modified. The consultants recommended a complete architectural overhaul, but Edgar couldn't afford the time or resources required for such a project. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, Edgar reached out to me through LinkedIn. His message was carefully worded, expressing regret about our misunderstanding and suggesting that we might be able to work together to resolve the technical challenges facing the industry. I left the message unread. The final blow came when one of the industry's most respected technology publications ran an investigative piece about the Nexus situation. The article included leaked internal documents showing that Edgar had known about the platform's architectural problems for months, but had chosen to blame them on personnel issues rather than addressing the underlying technical debt. The documents also revealed that Derek had been promoted despite warnings from senior engineers about his lack of technical competence. Several former Nexus employees were quoted anonymously, describing a culture where political loyalty was valued over technical expertise and where genuine innovation was discouraged in favor of quick fixes and cosmetic improvements. The article painted a picture of a company that had lost its way, where marketing narratives had become more important than technical reality. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing politics over competence, and it resonated throughout the technology industry. Within a week of the article's publication, Edgar announced his resignation as CTO. The board had apparently decided that new leadership was needed to restore confidence in the company's technical direction. Derek was quietly reassigned to a junior developer role, his brief tenure as a technical leader having ended in spectacular failure. I watched these developments with a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with vindication. The market had spoken, and it had chosen genuine innovation over corporate theater. The technology I developed in my bedroom had proven its worth in the most objective way possible, by solving real problems for real customers. PulseForge, meanwhile, was thriving. The success of the EtherCore platform had attracted attention from investors and potential acquisition targets. We were growing rapidly, hiring the best talent from across the industry, and building a reputation for technical excellence that attracted both customers and engineers. My role as CTO was everything I'd hoped it would be. I was responsible for the technical direction of the entire company, with the authority to make decisions based on engineering merit rather than political considerations. The board trusted my judgment, the engineering team respected my expertise, and customers were paying premium prices for the value we delivered. 1 year after my termination from Nexus, I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, looking out at the city skyline. The view was spectacular, but what I found most satisfying was the knowledge that I'd earned this position through technical competence rather than corporate maneuvering. The Nexus Systems building was visible in the distance, its corporate logo slightly faded and several floors apparently vacant. The company hadn't collapsed entirely, but it was a shadow of its former self. They'd eventually found a new CTO and were slowly working to rebuild their customer analytics platform, but the damage to their reputation was permanent. I turned back to my desk, where my monitor displayed the EtherCore repository. The codebase had evolved significantly since those early days in my apartment, with contributions from dozens of talented engineers, but at its heart, it was still the same elegant system I'd architected in my spare time, driven by the simple belief that technology should solve real problems rather than create artificial ones. I opened a new terminal window and began typing a commit message for the latest feature enhancement. The cursor blinked as I considered what to write. Then I smiled and typed, "Poor. They thought they owned it. I rebuilt it." The commit went through, adding another line to the history of a project that had started as a personal challenge and had become the foundation of a successful company. The code was clean, the architecture was sound, and the future was bright. In the end, that's what mattered most. Not the politics, not the betrayals, not even the sweet satisfaction of watching incompetence receive its due rewards. What mattered was the work itself, the elegant solutions to complex problems, the reliable systems that customers could depend on, and the knowledge that genuine innovation would always find a way to succeed. The technology industry had a way of separating the wheat from the chaff, of rewarding real talent while exposing those who relied on politics and positioning rather than competence. Edgar and Derek had learned this lesson the hard way, but I'd always known it to be true. As I prepared to leave the office for the day, I took one last look at the Nexus building in the distance. Tomorrow, I would continue building the future of customer analytics, surrounded by brilliant engineers who shared my commitment to excellence. Edgar and Derek, meanwhile, would continue dealing with the consequences of their choices. The market had spoken, and it had chosen quality over politics, innovation over imitation, and competence over corporate theater. In the end, that was the only revenge that mattered.